Hey everyone, I'm Joseph Juling. You may know me from the Singapore swimming team, and you're listening to the Unofficial S.League podcast. Alright guys, I did it. Now where's the Chai Tao Gui that you promised me?
Hi everyone, welcome to this special edition of the podcast. Today I have with me a very special guest, Mr. James Lim, who is running as an independent candidate for the upcoming FAS elections. Welcome to the show, James.
Yes, hi, good evening everybody.
So recently you made headlines in the local football fraternity by declaring your intention to run as an independent candidate. This is rather surprising actually, because previously you were part of Team Majula together with Venga, right?
Yeah, but I don't think it's any surprising because I've actually officially left Team Majula and actually declared that I will be running as an independent candidate from that date since onwards.
Okay, so as an independent candidate, what kind of impact do you think you would be able to bring to the FA and also to the local football fraternity?
As an independent candidate, that means that I'm not with any side. So basically, I see my role as being keeping the winning team focused on their campaign promises. I believe both teams will come out with a lot of promises to the affiliates. Someone got to remind them that, hey, you made these promises, so how are you going to deliver? So I see my role as that.
Okay. And looking at the current situation, looking at Singapore's ranking right now, one of its lowest in probably the last, God knows how many years. And also recent results in the AFC Cup where Tampines got trashed, really totally trashed. Going forward, by playing your role, how do you think you can help Singapore football in general?
I think we all know that the problem lies with the ecosystem. I don't think it's any one part. It's not just a national team. I think it's the pool of talent coming out from the grassroots through the academy. I think we really need to focus back on football, local football, where children of potential talent can actually get involved with teams and compete, and that will enhance their development and thus increasing the pool of players for the national team.
And also looking at you mentioned national pool. Of course, right now there's a furore over the NFL teams whereby, they were crying foul prior to this season. They were finding it difficult to find pitches to train on. They had no sponsorship at all, no insurance. And also recently we heard that teams like Police and SAFSA actually have rights to players that are serving national service. It's either you play for them or you don't play at all. Of course, these are all contributing factors that will constrict the national pool. Yeah. In your opinion, what do you think can be done to actually widen the national pool as it stands at this moment?
Yeah, I think it's important to focus on the NFL clubs because they actually play a very crucial role in youth development. Good young players must be given the opportunity to compete in a competition, in a league of good standard, right? And I think all we need to do is just go back and focus on developing local football clubs, whether they are NFL clubs or S.League club. I think we really need to go back to them and really help them to become better. I think once we raise the standards of the NFL clubs, the way they manage their club and their team, good players will have more opportunity to compete and develop. So I think we just need to focus back on local football.
And there's actually something that I'd like your opinion on. As you know, currently, youth players make up the bulk of our future talent pool, of course. And at the current moment, the setup is such that you play for the NFA teams, the under-17s, the under-18s, and then coming through that, you would actually play for the Young Lions. And subsequently, you will be supposedly picked for the national team. Do you think this is a good system, or would you think that it's better for individual clubs to develop their own young players and subsequently, the coach gets to pick players from different teams rather than having them come through the system basically, for what I see personally, as a direct route to the national team? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is FAS being lazy. They have this forced pathway for youth to go through the academy, and I think we are not creating the competition, because these players become complacent, because they came from the under 14 and then they feel that they are entitled to go to the under 16 without much competition. Very good example is that FAS do not have a chief scout, a unit or even someone who goes around Singapore looking at children playing football and identifying these talents and actually helping these young children go into academies or even center of excellence where they can further develop under a good coach, right? Because if you only focus on NFA, you're looking at maybe 20-25 students per age group. That's just too narrow. I think it should be at least 500 to 1,000 kids, competing with one another at individual age group, and then slowly with the scouting, the coaches can say, hey, this kid is good. We want to nurture. Then perhaps greater attention will be paid to these kids. But at the end of the day, it's competition. They must compete. They cannot be given any indication that they are the preferred ones, who will just simply progress along the pathway of the NFA. And I think the fact that we should be spreading all the talented children or talented players across all COEs and clubs. The Young Lions should be disbanded. I don't think it has proven not to have worked. I mean, it's not an opinion. Look at all these years of Young Lions being playing so badly and even gaining a losing mentality, so it's not healthy. I think all these young talents should be spread among all the different clubs and let them compete with other players. I mean, that's the only way I think they will show their true potential. Yeah, I think they are too protected.
So do you think having NFA teams playing in the Prime League, the under 17s and the under 18s playing in the same league, and they will be meeting each other at least twice in the same competition, do you think this is a good way to nurture these players? Or do you think we should be doing what Malaysia is doing, sending them for overseas competitions? Of course not Malaysia, we're talking about European countries or East Asian countries. Do you think that will work for Singapore?
Okay, obviously if there's budget for it, then we should try to send as many of our players overseas as much as possible. But it should not be seen as a holiday trip. It should be seen as a way, as an opportunity for them to gain experience. I don't know. If you have the budget, yes, send as many kids as possible. If we don't, then we have to be selective and choose the best of our talents. That's where the scouting needs to come in. I think if FAS does not have a scouting department, I don't think youth development can proceed very well.
So you mentioned about scouting, and I do agree with you. Scouting is one key element that is seriously lacking in the FA and in the national setup, or even at the club setup at the moment. So would this be one of the main priorities if, let's say, you get elected? Is this going to be one of the items that you're going to be pushing for?
Definitely. I believe scouting and also the standards of coaching as well. I think we have heard horror stories about coaches coming in late and things like that and not planning for the session. I think this is our horror stories. I'm not too sure how true it is, but if it's true, then I think we need to change. The mindset need to change. The coaches should be full-time and not trying to go to a training session and rushing off to another job. I think that will, the coaches will not be able to give full commitment, to developing the potential of our young players. So I think coaching standards, scouting, all these need to come in, and obviously with the broadened grassroots base, where more children are encouraged to take up football.
As we all know, S.League clubs are famous for one thing: giving people 11-month contracts. What is your take on this? Do you think that in order for players to perform better, do you think they should be given longer contracts, or is the current system working for FAS?
Yeah, I think the 11-month contract, I think that bonds out of the lack of budget, and people trying to be smart. Look at Tampines, they even talk about keeping 20% or 50% of the wages and then giving them out only at the end of the year. I'm not too sure whether that's legal, but I think that's not right. And who in his right mind would take a 11-month contract in a career that could potentially, they get injured and then they will lose out on next year. So there's a lot of insecurity. So what will happen is that, players may not be so committed, they may not go full out, in case they get injured. And they have only 11-month contract. I mean, I do not know. Who gives out 11-month contract these days? I'm not very sure.
Okay.
I'd like to add that, with regards to the 11-month contract, I think the clubs should not be totally blamed for this situation. I think FAS need to look at the way they budget for the S.League, It should not be on a year-to-year basis. I think clubs should know in advance for at least like 2-3 years that this is the budget that they're going to have, right? So that they can plan. Imagine that if they are not even sure of what budget going to get from FAS, how could they commit to the players on more than a year budget? I don't understand. Nobody can commit. No club can commit to the players if they do not know what's next year's budget, right? So there's one area. So I think players should be given a longer contract, but at the same time that I think FAS has a responsibility to help the clubs to be able to deliver that. Yeah, and 11 months and not getting a bonus, that's like taking advantage of the players. That's how I see it.
So I know that you are a marketing guy for so long, and we know that the league itself, the league has a pretty good sponsor at the moment in Komoko or Hyundai. But what do you think clubs can do to actually get more sponsorships on board? Looking at the current situation, they are actually, I think they are operating on handouts. I could say that, they're operating on handouts, and it's, like you mentioned, budget is a problem for them. How do you think they can get more sponsors on board? What kind of return on investment can they actually offer to sponsors?
Okay, I think the clubs need help. That's obvious. They need to increase the additional stream of revenue, which I think they are trying to. None of them are successful. It's like, if you look at Europe and other countries, they do own and operate the stadiums, right? So they can monetize the stadium facilities. We don't have that. We don't have that access for the clubs in Singapore, and it's very tough for the clubs to actually create additional revenue stream, without having control or access to assets that they can monetize. I think budget constraint, the lack of assets that can monetize, I think this create a lot of challenges for the S.League clubs. And I hope that the new FAS council can actually lend more support, getting sponsors in. I think it has to be done at the league level. I think at the club level it will be very challenging and very difficult to bring in sponsors. Especially if the matches are not well attended, you come to matches where only 200-300 people attend. Which sponsors will come in? I am not too sure. There's no mileage for them to come in.
So it's actually quite a bleak outlook. Would you say that?
Yes, it is. And I think the clubs need to do look at the things that they can do and not really focus on the things they can't do. And one of the things that they can do is actually be truly community based. Connect with the community that they are operating in, bring them in, at least all the matches will be well attended. And I think that would be a good start. And hopefully with a well attended league, sponsors can come in, league and the FAS or the S.League can come in and help to bring in sponsors and say, hey, this is a good event. People are coming, the residents in the community are coming in to support the team. There's bonding between the club and the community they are based in. I think this all will lead to greater public interest, right? I'm sure the government, the PA will come in to help if they see that it's part of engaging the residents, because when it's all geared towards our national, what do you call that? We want to bring in people together, people of all races, and football is one sport that can do it, one game that can do it. And I think the club should just concentrate on being a community base. I think for a start, I think it's not going to solve all your problem, but I think that is a good start.
Okay. And I actually had a couple of fans that came on the show, or a couple of guests that came on the show, and I think they stand in agreement with what you said, trying to get their respective communities of all the clubs more involved. But there's always one question mark that we all have whenever we talk about this, and that is how can the clubs do it? You know, how can they actually market themselves, or how can they actually get their respective communities more involved or instill a sense of belonging in them? I think it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's never easy. If it's easy, we wouldn't need people's association. You know, what we would need to do as a club is to ensure there's one officer in charge of community development. That person's job would just be to connect with all the grassroots committees and participate in their community events, or even help to co-organize some football events. So through all these things, I think you create bonding between the football club and the community. Now, the more the residents see the football club in the players, the mascots, or whatever not, it creates visibility for the club. And because it creates visibility for the club, there's a possibility that there could be public interest could be generated. I think let's do something simple. Just engage the grassroots committee, attract the residents to come in here and give. And importantly, when you bring in these residents, you got to make sure that the match day atmosphere is going to be good. They're not just going to come in here and see a dull game, right? I think the clubs and the S.League should spruce up the match day experience for this to happen. You can't bring in people here and then they get bored and then they won't come again. Yeah, so I think that is important.
Okay, and how do you think they can improve the match day experience? I mean, based on your experience, because I know you travel overseas to watch clubs in Europe.
I think
how do they do it?
The most obvious is to have a lot of singing and chanting and flags and colors. You know, a lot of banners and flags everywhere. I mean, you just got to get people to come in here, create their own flags, wave their flags. You know, and especially jerseys are very important. I mean, I think most of us find it difficult to get our club jersey. A few years back, when we were talking about Woodlands Wellington, it was really tough to get hold of a Woodlands Wellington jersey. Like, we have to make special order and we have to beg. You know, it's got to the extent, we are paying, we're not asking for free, and yet we still can't get it. Right? So I think merchandising is also important. I think S.League should look into it as well. It's not just about the business, but it's also about the identity. I think merchandising creates identity for the clubs, besides just the monetary part. Yeah, so I think it's important. I think there are so many things that we need to do. I really don't know where to start. I mean, if I ever get into the council, there are so many areas that we need to look into. There are so many things that we should start. I think we can start simple. Let's not be too over-ambitious, you know. I think we got to start now. I mean, something that we may only see result maybe in 5 to 10 years' time. But we got to start now. If we don't start now, there's no future.
I remember back when the league started in '96, I was in secondary school, and how I got to be so affiliated with Woodlands was because I remember that there was this magazine called Goal, which focused, actually a part of it was on the English Premier League, of course, but there was also a very big portion of it that was dedicated to local football. And I remember the very first edition on the S.League that came out, they actually had a map, and on this map, basically it's a Singapore map, and they actually highlighted all the stadiums in various towns where the teams would be playing. And in every stadium, they actually highlighted the star players of each team. Of course, I would say a lot of these players came from the Malaysia League. Of course, Singapore team at that time, Singapore FA was playing in Malaysia. They were very successful. So when they split these players to all the different stadiums, it actually created a lot of buzz. And they got a lot of Malaysia League stars, and they even got like Iranian players, you know, who went on to play in the World Cup later. And by reading that as a young boy, it got me very interested in the league. Of course, today goal doesn't exist anymore. I think with the advancement of, you know, all this traditional media, it has already gone into online media. So that is one part that probably we can't go back to that. But there was another distinctive thing that I remember when I came to Woodlands Stadium to watch the game here, and that was the S.League truck. There was a truck going around selling merchandise from different clubs, which means that you can actually buy, example, Police FC merchandise while you're watching a Woodlands and Geylang game. And I have no idea what happened to the truck. Today, like you mentioned, I went to a game in, I can't remember what was the game, Geylang. Okay, they had jerseys. Of course they had jerseys. But they only had jerseys from Geylang. and Geylang was playing Balestier. What if I was a Balestier fan that went to Bedok to watch them play, and what if at the spur of the moment I wanted to buy something from Balestier? I couldn't get it. And even in Balestier, even in Toa Payoh Stadium, when I went there to watch a Prime League game, there was no shop. So I believe probably it's not viable to open a shop 7 days a week. But do you think it's good if clubs can have a small merchandise shop that opens, probably not every day, but certain days of the week and certain hours of the days that they are open? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think this will definitely be helpful. As I said again, all this merchandising creates identity. And I think having an identity makes it all like, we are all in it together, for a particular group of supporters. But I think realizing that the economy of scale, given that we are now not having a very well attended football matches, it may even be given hardship to the clubs if this initiative is to be their responsibility. I think for a start, I think the S.League should take up this initiative to create a S.League merchandising unit, where they will help to distribute merchandises for all various clubs. And obviously the bigger ones like perhaps Albirex or Tampines, those clubs that have a big fan base, then perhaps they can do it on their own. But I think generally speaking, I think all the other clubs need help. I think the new council should look into this, help to get the initiative going and then keep it for a few years. It has to be, we have to sustain, because if you don't sustain, you do it 1 year, next year you don't do. Like a lot of things that we do in Singapore football, we organize one tournament and the next series is not going to happen. And people look for, like Lion City Cup, I mean, it should be a regular thing that kids look forward to representing the country, And I think this is very crucial. A lot of things that S.League need to do. I'm not sure whether FAS should be looking after S.League. They may not have the management capability to run a league, because they are basically authorities, looking after regulations and things like that. I think to have a vibrant S.League, it cannot be managed by FAS. I think it has to be privatized. Yeah, I think the word privatized sends a lot of different signals to different people. It's not just about money. I think it's also about management capability. Talking about the initiative, I think S.League should not be under FAS. I think it has to be managed by a different party. Not too sure if it's. I think privatization to me means that you will bring in different management people to organize the S.League. FAS does not have this ability to do so. That's basically sad. I think the decline of the S.League has a lot to do with FAS not doing their job.
So regarding about privatization, I think this is something that a couple of guests that came on the show, they did mention this word as well. What do you think are the steps? Of course, we can't do it overnight. What are the steps that we need to set in motion in order for the league to be privatized?
I think, to me, it's quite pretty straightforward. You need to identify investors, and these investors also will have to do their own research and development to see. To get a feasible, a viable model for a professional league in Singapore. At least for the first few years, I think FAS or even Todd Board will have no choice but to support such an investor to come in. Perhaps they could use the annual grant that they are giving to all the S.League clubs. Perhaps this grant should be given to S.League. FAS can come in as a partner, as a joint venture partner with a private investor, at least for the first few years, and then with the aim that the joint venture will return the money to FAS, after 5 years or whatever that is. So the first 5 years will be just a joint venture where both parties will put in the money to come up with a viable business model for the S.League, and then once they are stabilized, then FAS can exit from this joint venture and be a truly private venture. I think it's not possible now.
So still on this topic of privatization, one thing that many fans would feel would be that clubs should own the stadiums. I don't think this is viable in Singapore, of course, but do you think that, probably what are the things that can be done in order for clubs to have more control over the stadium? Example, sometimes they want to play friendly games and they can't play it at night because they don't, probably there's some arrangement issue or something, but they have to play it in the daytime because floodlights are not on in the evening. Or, for example, they may want to do some training, but because the stadium is booked for other events from schools and they cannot do their training. I mean, these are just some of the small issues that have been going around for quite a while. Do you think it's important for them to own or to maybe rent the stadium or control the stadium to a certain degree so that they have better control over how they use it? Is it a necessity?
Yeah, I think owning a stadium by itself will not be feasible for any businessman, unless you are talking about an integrated
sports complex.
Where you have restaurants and shops and all this, and then I think it's possible. I think that model may have to be the way of the future, where it's an integrated complex. It could be a joint venture between Sports SG and private investors, where they invest in the club, and then the club will be the anchor tenant. And I think once you have that, then you are unlocking a lot of revenue from a lot of these facilities or assets within the stadium complex. If you tell me the stadium by itself is going to be a white elephant, because unless you really want to upgrade all the lightings and everything so that it become feasible for people, event company to book these stadiums where they can actually show live and things like that. At the moment, I think our facilities are not up to even AFC standard. Right, so I think it's just not going to work. I mean, if Sports SG do not invest and upgrade our stadium to AFC standards, football will never pick up.
And still on the topic of stadiums, and this was something that I spoke with one of the guests offline. It wasn't recorded because he wasn't comfortable in talking about it. Now, if you look at most stadiums in Singapore, there's a running track around the stadium.
Yes.
So sometimes you are really far away from the action, of course, and when the teams are playing, you don't feel like you don't feel the atmosphere because you're sitting so far away. And even when people are shouting on the opposite stands, the sound is dissipated because everybody's sitting so far away from each other. So this is a wild idea that he had, because he's also watching basketball. And in the sports hub, what the slingers are doing is, whenever they have a basketball game, they pull the stands in. It's a portable stand, and it goes really close to the court, where you have the action. You're so close to the action, and you really enjoy yourself when you watch the game. Do you think this is something that we can adopt in Singapore, whereby instead of sitting on concrete seats in the grandstand, you have portable metal seats,
mechanical,
that you can actually pull close to the action, and after the game is completed, you can just push it aside where it doesn't get into the way of the people who need to use it for jogging the next day.
I think in the modern days, I think this is not only possible. I mean, if you're talking about 10-20 years ago, I think maybe the technology, the engineering part may be too expensive. But I think now, to get those mechanical seats that get moved closer to the stage and then after that move back, I think that is obviously a very possible scenario. And I agree, to have seats nearer to the field creates the environment. Because whatever we shout, the players can hear. And when players can hear, sometimes they may react. Right? And that's the fun part about football. That's why we always shout at the referees, not because we don't like them. We just want to just get an action from them, a reaction from them. Right? And the more reaction they give, the more louder we shout. That's the human element to it. And that's football, that's football. We sing, we shout, we wave our flags. That should be the way football should be in Singapore.
And another piece of infrastructure that is always being lamented by photographers are the floodlights. I mean, most photographers would complain, or to put it politically correctly, they would feedback that lighting is horrible at stadiums in Singapore, except for Jalan Besar, which has pretty decent lighting. Do you think that, because floodlights are used for the football pitch, but the stadium belongs to SSC, right? Or it's under the care of SSC. There's nothing in it for SSC to upgrade the floodlights, obviously, unless something comes down from the top. But do you think FAS can have a say in this, like upgrade the floodlights so that even it makes it better for the spectators to view the action more clearly, I would say.
I think all these are very possible. I mean, if you look at it, both FAS and Sports SG belong to the same ministry. Come on, it's only left to right pocket. Right? I mean, they could have just select maybe 6 or 7 central stadiums, where these stadiums will be under a joint operational management by both SSG and the football club. Right. So I think that way it will good, because then what will happen is that, you know, when the stadium is not used for football, it could be used for other public activities, right? And obviously the field is the one sensitive part lah, that you do not want to damage the field through overuse of the field itself. So I think it is possible. 5, 6 central stadium jointly between FAS and Sports SG. They think of something, make it work, make it a good stadium to play football in, make it a good place for the public to come in and enjoy themselves.
Okay.
I think it's very possible. Have restaurants, have shops around that place. People will come.
And what you mentioned is it's helpful to add on to the matchday experience, because you can have everything in one complex. You can have your meal there, watch a game, after the meal go for some shopping, and probably if the wife and the kids don't like football, they can have something to do next door, just at the doorstep of the stadium. Okay, couple more questions before we conclude. Quick ones. What is your ideal number of teams in the league? Looking at the league now, it's 9 teams. It's an odd number. Of course, we would like to top it off to an even number.
Yeah.
Ideally, would you like to see like
12 teams?
12 teams?
12 teams.
Okay.
I think 12 teams will create a lot of variety, right? And I think Singapore is big enough to have 12 teams.
Okay.
Right. You just have to figure out the stadiums. We may even have to share stadiums when it comes to that.
What's your perception on foreign teams in the league? Do you think they should remain? Are they improving our football, or do you think we should just replace them and just have all full 12 local clubs?
I think now we need to go back to the basics. I think let's just stick to local football clubs now, and build up our own players. Of course, the idea of bringing in foreign teams is to increase the standard, to raise the standard. But I think if you look at the foreign players that we have nowadays, I don't think they're raising the standards. I think they are at par. Maybe 1 or 2 would be better, but I think generally speaking, they are not as good as. They could be equally just as good as the local players, but not better. So they are not actually increasing the standard.
Okay. One final question. I'm not sure if it's tough for you to answer. Promotion and relegation for the S.League, yes or no?
Of course, yes.
Yes?
Of course, yes. It creates hope for the NFL clubs. It makes S.League club less complacent, so that there's a consequence of them being the worst in the league. Because right now, being the worst in the league doesn't mean anything to them. They will still be back next year.
Yep.
So there's no motivation to increase the standard.
And there's always this question about, if an NFL team gets promoted and it comes into the S.League, financially, this is what people are saying. Financially, they may not be able to run the club effectively. The other thing is, of course, the levels of fitness, which I think something can be done about it. I mean, if players get promoted to the S.League, it gives them an incentive to make themselves fit and to change from what they're doing part-time. They're playing football part-time, of course, and then they have a full-time job. There should be some form of incentive given by...
Oh, definitely. I think it's not fair to compare the NFL club to the S.League, because one get a $900,000 or $800,000 grant, the other get nothing.
Yep.
Right. I think more assistance should be given to the NFL clubs to build themselves up. I think it will not be overnight. I think it will take a few years, but I think some seed money should be given to them. To let them grow themselves. Let them get better. And it's not going to be overnight. They can't address everything in 1 year. They will take probably 5 years, to become comparable to S.League clubs. Then when you have comparable standards, then the relegation and promotion will really work. Now I think it's very tough to expect a NFL club to match the standard of an S.League club within a year or 2. I think that will be a very tough challenge.
Okay, I think that's all I have for you. I wish you the best of luck for the elections, of course, and hopefully if you do get elected, we can see some positive changes. What with all the negative light being painted on FAS at the moment, we really would like to see Singapore football move forward.
Yeah. I think one message I like to leave everybody: let's be positive. I think let's not keep bringing up the past. I think what has passed is gone. I think we have to look to the future, and as a potential council member, I would wish that whoever wins, let's work together and chart the journey for better Singapore football.
Okay, thank you very much, James.
Thank you. Good night. Right, and definitely S.League under FAS.
Lightning warning system just came on.
9:30.
9:30. We still have 15 minutes,
Yeah.
and they turn on the alarm on us. So typical of SSC.